Hajde da pričamo o gladnim ljudima Afganistana. Prošlo je više od godinu od kad su talibani preuzeli vlast nad tom zemljom, a nedostatak hrane i ekonomska kriza teško pogađaju tamošnje stanovništvo. Naše kolegice Julia Mills i Sandra Gatman iz sestrinske emisije Start Here bile su u Afganistanu i evo šta su zabilježile.
Let's talk about Afghanistan and what's going on a year after the Taliban took power.
The fighters who spent the last 20 years at war with the government and its Western allies are the government now. But not a single country in the world officially recognizes them. And all this change has created a massive economic shock that's affecting everyone.
The state of economy in Afghanistan is it is very frightening.
You've got international sanctions, a banking crisis, and big questions about the Taliban's plans to deal with it all, including whether they're up to the job.
They do not have the expertise and they do not know what type of expertise they need.
So what does this mean for people's everyday lives? And where is the country headed?
These men are waiting to pick up some work, but right now, there's not much work going. While we were filming, someone dropped off some bread, and their reaction says a lot. People in Afghanistan are hungry. This is the sharp end of the country's economic collapse. And it's a reality that nearby Taliban policemen didn't want us to film, so we had to leave quickly.
The commander was very angry, even pointed a gun at our crew and pointed a gun at our car as we were driving off.
At this food distribution point in Kabul, people are waiting to get rations for the month or to register for aid. It's run by the UN's World Food Program, which says more than 22 million Afghans don't have enough to eat. That's over half the population.
کیت سبزی کاراچی بودیم بکردیم روی 100-400 کار میکردیم خاطرمو یک چاره و پردیمون میشد چیزی کم یک سال میشه که بیکار هستیم 8 نفر نانخور در خانه داریم چون ما مجبور هستیم در این کمک ها ضرورت داریم اگر این کمک ها نباشه ما نمیتونیم گزاره کردن.
Salaries have vanished, livelihoods have vanished. Families that were just scraping by in the past, they have gone through 1 year of economic hardship. They have nothing left to cope with.
Let's pull back a second and look at what's behind this collapse. The trigger was the sudden change in power last year. In April, President Biden announced that all U.S. forces would be out by September.
It's time for American troops to come home.
Other countries with troops in Afghanistan followed the U.S. lead. The Taliban quickly started gaining territory, province by province, and by August 15th, they were in the presidential palace. That same day, President Ashraf Ghani fled. Thousands of others were desperate to leave too. And in place of the old Islamic Republic, the Taliban declared a new Islamic Emirate. The world's immediate response was to isolate the new government. But that also ripped away the foundations of the economy.
The thing to know about Afghanistan's economy is that for the last 20 years, it was super dependent on international aid. We're talking billions of dollars every year. Foreign aid made up 75% of government spending. It basically kept the country going. But when the Taliban took power last year, that flow of aid stopped pretty much overnight. A couple of other big things happened. The US and others froze Afghanistan's sovereign assets held abroad. And international sanctions meant the country was essentially cut off from the global financial system.
That means the central bank and commercial banks in Afghanistan can't function properly.
We cannot make any transactions globally, regionally, even to our, neighbors. And so this limits the ability of Afghan traders and businessmen to do business with anybody in the world.
There's also a cash crisis. You can only take out $400 a week. The country is literally running out of Afghani banknotes. And even for businesses that rely on local demand, a lot of that has just dropped away. This printing business used to work around the clock, printing everything from school exam papers to posters for NGOs. Now it's gone from 13 employees to just 2, and the machines are silent.
نیست کاروبار نیست ساعت نیست همون صاحبه که کار میداد کسایی که موسا بودن اونا همگیشان رفتن بله خب واقعیت است چون که ما به بسیار امید کار میکردیم و چون افتخار میکردیم که به کشور خودم افغانستان کاروبار از کار میکنیم ما عاید میکنیم اما حالا که حالت میبینیم بسیار زیاد دشوار شده.
It's a crisis after a crisis. The Afghan economy was already recovering from COVID, the pandemic, the drought, and we were about to take off. Imagine a plane which just takes off, and then the pilots change and they want to change the entire engines of the plane.
The Taliban are taking Afghanistan in a new direction, one that's based on their interpretation of Afghan culture and Islam. Some of the biggest changes have been the restrictions imposed on women and girls, restrictions that also have economic consequences. Women are being excluded from senior government jobs, and school for teenage girls has been suspended in almost all provinces. A recent UN report highlighted that under the Taliban, women and girls have been subjected to severe restrictions on their human rights, resulting in their exclusion from most aspects of everyday and public life. For many countries, protecting the rights of women and girls is a red line. The issue has become an obstacle in the Taliban's relationship with the outside world, and it means the Taliban are struggling to get the kind of international financial support that the country needs.
How often does the issue of women's rights come up in your negotiations?
It is always one of the main points of our discussions. We try to balance it in terms of try to get them to understand that we have different values, that we have different religious beliefs, and our society operates on a different level than that of the United States or the Western Hemisphere.
But not all Afghans share the Taliban's version of what Afghan values are, and many worry that their approach is setting the country back.
The momentum of past 20 years, the progress thinking within Afghanistan, the economical development, the infrastructure, the linkages that Afghanistan got in past 20 years with the rest of the world, with the integration that Afghanistan got with the international community, they have been losing all those areas, and that has been creating a lot of worry on the ground. It is creating a lot of worry within the Afghan people.
To reach or even catch up with the pace that the world is progressing, we need a lot of expertise and we need a lot of capacity. And the key for that is education. So education becomes really, really important. If we're going to stop people to go to school, especially women and girls, I think that's going to create a lot of other problems for us.
Now, it's worth keeping in mind that the previous government had its problems too. Things like bribery and corruption, which led to questions about where a lot of the international aid was going.
Billions of dollars were poured into this country for the last 20 years, and we're in a village just half an hour outside of Kabul. There's no school, and there's never been a health clinic here. So when we're thinking about how Afghanistan's economy has changed in the last year, you've got to remember that the baseline was already low.
This mobile clinic, funded by Care International, only started up a few months ago. The doctor comes once a week.
یو پرستامول یعنی 10 روپۍ چې قیمت لري دوی دا وس نه لري چې دا واخلي د بازار صحي خدماتو لاسرسی نه لري همدارنګه اوس دا اول ځل ده چې موږ دلته راځو دوی ته خدمات وړاندې کوو.
The women we met were desperate to tell us how hard things are, how they don't have clean water, and that it's always been like this for them. So faced with all these problems, what are the Taliban actually doing? Well, right now, they really need money, fast, to run the country and make up for some of that lost foreign aid. So for example, they're tapping into Afghanistan's natural resources and trying to boost trade with neighboring countries like Pakistan, trade they can tax.
We're in the province of Bamiyan, and these trucks are headed to the capital, Kabul. And right here, you've got two of the biggest sources of revenue for this Taliban government. You've got coal, which is probably going to be exported to Afghanistan's neighbors, and the trucks themselves, which are going to go through customs checkpoints. And the taxes collected there are another major earner.
These are the sectors that the Taliban frequently highlight as examples of how they're getting a grip on things.
And the circumstances that we find ourselves in terms of the sanctions and the blockades and the cutting us off from the international banking system, where the civilians and the businessmen and traders have to pay a high price in the form of collective punishment. We, from our end as the government, assess our conduct and our approach to governance in a very positive light. We've had a lot of progress and a lot of achievements.
Yes, there are a few things that are happening, and one can say, oh, these are great things happening, but they don't suffice. They're not enough to address all of our economic issues, and specifically the immediate issues that we have, bringing food on the table, widespread poverty, and access to health and other issues.
For instance, there's a $500 million hole in the budget, and it's not clear where the Taliban will find the money to plug it. They've already cut entire government departments and slashed the salaries of government workers. Add to that a security threat from ISKP, the regional affiliate of ISIL. They've claimed several attacks in the last year. Plus, the devastation caused by an earthquake in June, which killed more than 1,000 people. So the scale of the challenge is vast. The Taliban say they've got the people and experience to deal with it because they controlled large parts of the country before. But others seriously question their competence.
They are still in honeymoon mood. First, they do not realize. Second, they don't have the capacity to realize the very essence or those very important, huge problems that Afghanistan is facing in economy, politically, socially, and with international community.
The understanding is not there, and the willingness for inclusivity is not there. If there are people who are capable and who have expertise are not welcomed just because they have different political or ideological, reasons, I would say it's not going to help out.
Now, something else we should clear up is that despite the sanctions, hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency aid is still reaching Afghanistan, including from the US, which has granted sanction exemptions for humanitarian aid. But that's aid to help keep people alive. Helping people to actually prosper, that's going to take so much more.
We need a partnership with the global community, international community, that can actually take Afghanistan to its sustainable path.
That kind of cooperation, at least with the West, still looks far off, and things just got even more complicated.
At my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan that killed the emir of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri.
The Americans say Taliban leaders knew Al-Qaeda's leader was in Kabul and accused the Taliban of breaking promises they made on security, while the Taliban call the U.S. drone strike a clear violation of international principles. Rebooting a relationship after 20 years of fighting was never going to be easy. But despite all of the challenges that Afghans face today, there is at least some relief that the mistrust is no longer playing out on the battlefield.
This past year without war has been a welcome change for many Afghans who tell us the streets do feel safer and they can now travel across the country more easily, at least for those who can afford it. But millions of people are going hungry, and there's nothing stable or secure about that.